You're listening to Back Pew Convos.
I'm Sean.
And I'm Sal. And this is the podcast God wants you to listen to.
So if you want to remain in God's will, have a sit down.
Grab a beverage of your choice.
And have a listen.
You're welcome.
You know what?
What?
We're just going to do it.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
Yeah. What it is, it's going to be done.
It is finished.
Yeah.
Maybe. Perhaps.
Yeah. Now and not yet, I suppose. That's something I've been thinking about a little bit this week too.
It's been a little more your cup of tea.
The now and not yetness.
Well, just the time, God's transcendence of time and the implications of that and what all that means. And on one hand, it's something that really is interesting. It does interest me a little bit. And on another hand, I feel like that it's can be a little bit nonsensical in ways.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's the thing. I think that at the heart of it, most of what we profess to be true as Christians is nonsensical, actually.
Maybe.
I mean, I guess it depends.
That's probably why there's so much tension with me and a lot of certain things, because I'm just not willing to accept the nonsensical. So if it's got to at least have some basis and logic, or it gives me a lot of fits.
Well, so I say nonsensical, but I really just mean like beyond comprehension.
Yeah. I'd say probably a good way to put it would be the unexpected.
Right. Yeah. Surprise.
Yeah.
It's full of surprise. It's full of I mean, I know one thing you're comfortable with is referring to all of it as upside down. Like it's just always, it's never quite exactly what you think it is or it's going to be. It's a
Right.
Surprise.
Surprise, surprise.
Surprises. It's a surprise.
Surprise, surprise. I hit that note.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know the song.
I hit a note.
You hit, it was a note.
Yes.
For sure. Well, what in the world? I don't know what we're going to talk about. This was, we literally just talked about how we didn't know what we were going to talk about right before we started talking.
Yeah, we actually didn't even know we were going to record today until today.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And, my mind's been all over the place because I've kind of been, I've been thinking about some things theological, but then a lot of things like I'm trying really hard on my diet and getting back into lifting. So like I've been listening to more stuff on that because I mean, on the one hand, like that stuff is pretty like common sense stuff that like it doesn't take much to figure out. Like on the one hand, there is like just eat a lot of protein, count your calories, and make sure your calories are make sure you're burning more than you're taking in.
Right.
Keep your protein high enough you don't lose muscle while you're losing weight, and lift heavy a few times a week. Do some cardio. Again, calorie deficit. Yeah, just do that,
Right.
and you're going to lose weight. Like a lot of it's not super like it doesn't take a whole lot of like knowledge to do that. But on the other hand, there's also like there's a lot of science behind nutrition and exercise and and all of that's constantly changing because the science is getting updated and new studies are coming out and all that stuff. So like
Right.
I've been trying to educate myself on some of that stuff too.
Yeah, I feel like it's about like probably anything else, but you can I see the benefits and the negatives of it, because on one hand I see that, and this is the way I am. Whenever I throw myself into something, I want to immerse myself in it, and it sort of keeps me motivated, or keeps, it's just like the whole principle of speak to yourself in psalms and hymns, right? Like if your mind is trained on that thing, you're listening to that these things, and you're surrounding yourself with it. It's going to keep you motivated and inspire you, and it's going to keep your mind focused on the goal at hand. You know what I mean? Um, but there is also just so much information that sometimes it just it can bog you down. So you got to be careful with it too. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Like today, I just didn't have a lot of time. So I came home and I did squats, which I did. I mean, a proper warm up and everything. It ended up being 13 sets with warm ups and everything. But my working sets was like 6 sets of 3 with about 85% of my 1 rep max. I mean, 6 sets, and this, I didn't do any accessories. I did nothing else. But that's what I had time to do. You know what I mean? And like,
Right.
that's not optimal. But I did, like if I got bogged down in that, I'm the kind of person that can be like, well, it's not even going to be worth my time to do this. But I did it anyway. So yeah.
Yeah.
But it's like anything else. Like I said, you can get bogged down with anything. I just feel like nutrition is super bad, because you'll listen to one person who will swear to you that eggs will give you a heart attack, and then you will listen to the next person who are like, eggs are the healthiest thing that you can possibly eat, and it's like, I don't even know who to trust and what to believe. It's not,
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I'd say probably all things in moderation are fine. You know,
All
like
things are
there's
permissible, but not all things are beneficial.
right. Like what I've been doing is like been trying to get like 45% of my calories from protein and then kind of like an even split on everything else.
Yeah.
So,
Well, you're putting way more effort into it than me. I'm just trying not to eat like a jerk. I mean, I have no idea how many calories I ate today, but I eat pretty healthy,
yeah,
like fairly good. Ate a few tuna steaks, some rice, beans, some boiled eggs. Had a double cheeseburger for supper, but not like a fast food one, like a grilled
right.
ground beef patty that I patted out. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah,
yeah, all in all, probably ate about 3,000 calories ish. Solid amount of protein. Ran 3 miles.
it doesn't sound like 3,000 calories. Depends on how many eggs you had and
I had 4 eggs, bowl of
everything.
fruit, a banana, protein
Okay,
shake.
so
Yeah,
there was more stuff.
I had about 3,000 calories. It's like
You didn't
I've been,
say
I've been
everything.
doing this long enough to know it was about 3,000.
Yeah. Well, I still like I did it for so long before I can kind of like tell how much I'm having, but I prefer to just count it. It makes me feel better.
Yeah.
Makes me I just like to see it to know for sure, you know.
I'm a
It's
little
easier
bit
for me to track it.
I'm a little bit weary about it, because when I first, when we really got into it and I lost 140 pounds, I developed like an eating disorder with it. Like I was super obsessive about counting my calories. Like I was to the point to where like, because I would count everything out and plan it a day ahead. And so then when like something would come up, like our friends would be like, hey, you want to go out and eat? Like I would actually get angry about that, because it would mess up you know what I mean? So I was
Right.
like to that point to where I'm like, I don't know. Like, right now
Yeah.
things are working out all right for me without getting too crazy about it. So I'm just trying to chill out in the middle.
Yeah. But I mean, I have been losing weight consistently. So,
There's no doubt about it. It works.
yeah. But yeah, yeah, I try not to let stuff like that bother me either. It's just having the willpower to, because like I mean, honestly, you could like I hadn't planned on it, but like if we decided we are gonna go eat after this or whatever, like I could do it. I would just have to like make a good choice and like show some restraint,
Yeah.
you know. But
That's the sucky thing about trying to lose weight, because you just want to be like, I don't want to have to worry about that. You know what I mean? Like if we're just gonna go, we decide we want to go out and eat Mexican after this. I just want to go out and eat Mexican without having to worry about like, well, now I'm gonna have to burn some extra calories. Like that sucks. But at the same time, if I want to get like not being disciplined got me in the situation I'm in. So
Right. Yeah.
if I had been a little more disciplined along the journey, I wouldn't be in the situation I'm in, and then I wouldn't have to worry about doing stuff like that. So
Yeah.
look at us developing into a health and fitness podcast.
I don't know about that. I don't know that anyone should take any advice. Well, I mean, the thing is, believe it or not, we do know quite a bit about it. It doesn't look like I know a whole lot about it, but at one time I was in much better shape than I am now.
I mean, physically, I've done about everything a person can do. I played college football. I've been 315 pounds. I lost 140 pounds, got down to 170. I did an MMA fight. I've run ultra marathons and marathons. I've held 5 different state powerlifting records. I've done 2 strongman competitions. Like I know a little bit about fitness.
Right. Yeah, I mean, both of us have had enough experience to know how to help someone lose weight and be healthier.
The problem is, it's not that my head knowledge, it's my willpower.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
It's my free will. I'm exercising my free will to be obese.
You know that I said before we started that my mind's been all over the place, and it really has. Because I've been all this stuff we were just talking about with like diet and working out and all that. Like I've been thinking about that stuff a lot. But then you said free will, and that reminded me. Oh yeah, I've been thinking about that too. Some,
Yeah.
to some extent.
It came up a little bit because I've listened to, well, Annika Harris. I don't know if you know who she is. She's married to Sam Harris.
I know who Sam Harris is, but I don't know
It's his
her.
wife, but she was on Rich Roll recently, and I listened to her on that because I love the Rich Roll podcast. So I listened to her on there, and I thought it was very interesting the stuff she was talking about. So I listened to her on another podcast today, and she was talking a little bit about free will. I mean, she didn't get nuts into it, but she was talking about it a little bit. So it had been on my mind through that a little bit.
We're recording still, right?
I don't know. You're the boss here.
Well, normally it has like our time, how long we've been recording up there, but it says it has stop and pause as options, so I'm assuming that we're still recording.
We'll hit pause and see what happens.
Oh, it's moved. They moved it. The time's up there. Sorry. Sorry. Maybe editing Sean will take this out. Maybe I won't. But
That's your call, man. You're the editor.
yeah. But anyway, sorry, I zoned out because I got distracted. What was she saying about free will?
Oh, nothing really. I just was I was only saying that because she had mentioned it in a couple of those episodes, that because her kind of big thing was consciousness in general, and she was talking about that, which obviously free will factors into that too. Which her husband wrote a book entitled Free Will as well, so that's kind of his thing. So,
Yeah.
so that got me thinking about it a little bit, but I didn't put any like hard mental gymnastics into it or anything. I just
Right. Well, I mean, so I oscillate, I think is the word. I go back and forth quite a bit
that would be oscillation.
between like a certain view of maybe not free will, but freedom in the sense of like
I thought you were making a funny free dumb, like being dumb, like stupid, ignorant.
yeah.
We're
Uh,
free to be dumb. That's what I thought you were saying.
well, you could go that way also, and that would have been funnier. But that's not what I would just say words weird. But our freedom,
Yeah.
uh, versus free will, and so I oscillate between like I know that Brad Jerzik has talked a lot about God's being canonic and um, God sort of like giving you over. Like part of what we talk about whenever we talk about God's wrath is God giving you over to like natural consequences. So like in one sense, God's not. So we have free choices and we experience the consequences of those choices and all that. So I sort of oscillate between that sort of idea of like a freedom and maybe we just have no freedom at all.
Yeah. That's, I think that's a fair oscillation to make.
But and the thing is, I used to would have said that having the idea of us having no freedom whatsoever was very troubling. And I'm not saying it's not troubling, but I don't know. at least where I'm at right now, I don't know that that's any more troubling
Right.
than us having freedom and all of that. Like, I don't know.
I mean, some things about reality are just troubling.
Yeah.
You know, like that's
Right.
just they at least, I'm 38 years old, and that's one thing I've learned in my life experience is that some things about reality are just troubling. So
Yeah.
maybe, I mean, just the fact that it's troubling doesn't mean it's not true.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. But the thing, even in saying that, I don't know because I don't necessarily mean determinism either.
Yeah.
Like, I don't necessarily mean like predestination in that sense of like every single thing that we say or do, every single thing that happens to us is God's will. Like, I
Right.
don't believe that.
Well, I just
Um,
think about it from a practical, like what I would call a scientific, or a critical point of view is like, I mean, think if right now there was just a sudden loud crash above our heads. What are you going to do? Like you're going to jump, you're going to flinch, but you didn't free will like yourself to do that. That's just a you know what I mean? So like, but how
natural
much of
reaction.
like, and that's sort of an easy example to see, but how much of those things are like that we think that we just do, not like a conscious decision that we've made, but
Yeah.
are just like a natural process, like, I mean, we don't, another easy one is like, we're not sitting here every single breath thinking, breathe in, breathe out. We just do it. You
Right.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like, how many other things are like that we're just not even aware of, that we're not choosing to do necessarily, but our brain and our body is just doing,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Mhm.
I
Yeah.
mean, and I think about it from a perspective of like, maybe like addiction in a way. I mean, addiction's maybe a little bit different because there's chemicals, from the substances involved in that. But I mean, like I've personally known people that have struggled with addictions who like wanted to not do the thing, but like did it anyway. Like, you know what I mean?
Right.
Because their will to not do it wasn't free.
Yeah.
It was shackled to the chemical reactions contained within their brain.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. So yeah, so like there are certain things that are like that, and then there are some things like what we would call willpower, like things that you can that it does seem like you have some control over. Um, and then a lot of times it's but I mean, even then, a lot of times, even exercising that self-control is only after you've had a natural reaction. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
well, I mean, like you
Well,
could use food as an example. Like my natural reaction a lot of times is to want to eat everything in sight, but I can exercise my some willpower.
right, but I think the key word in there is exercise, and
Right.
that puts a stress. It actually does put a little bit of stress and a little bit of importance on the things that we do, because everything that we do and the things that we surround ourselves with and the situations that we put ourselves in and all that factors into, you know what I mean? So like if we're if we don't, as far as diet, let's stick with that example. If I'm not putting myself in situations where I'm constantly knowing that I have a problem with eating, well, that if I'm trying my best to avoid situations to where these tempting foods are all around me, and I'm listening to the podcast and stuff like you're talking about, and I'm, me and you are partnered up in this thing, and like we're going to hold each other accountable, and like all these things help to build up my willpower. But if I try to go at it alone, and I'm constantly like I'm working in fast food, so I'm around it all the time, and like you've got all these other factors going up against you, you know what I mean? Like I think it stacks the deck against you. It's not, and
Yeah.
that's always been my thing with free will is like if a will's truly free, that means there's no external influences on it. You've got, I can either choose yes or no, and it's strictly based on what I want. Like I can do anything that I want to do here, and I just don't know that, again, based on like what we were just saying, is that really true? I mean, sure, you have a choice ultimately to eat that food or not, but it's not a 50-50. Just I'm not influenced by anything.
Yeah.
Your influences obviously matter. Therefore, your will isn't free. There are things that it's shackled to.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, depending on how you conceptualize because like neither one of us would be comfortable with the idea of like original sin in the sense of like inherited guilt or anything like that. But like, however we want to conceptualize it, that the idea that none are righteous, no, not one, that none seek God is another. Which I've thought about that one too. That one's kind of weird, and
Seems a bit dramatic, but
yeah. Well, Jesus says, like Paul says that, right? That no one seeks after God. I believe that's also in Romans where he said, he's quoting the Old Testament when he says, none, there's none righteous, not one.
yeah, that's a psalm.
Yeah. But then he also, um, but Jesus says, if you seek, you'll find, right? So anyway, uh, I got my mind sidetracked. But yeah, but like, I mean, and there's either way we want to slice that. Like, there seems to be, it seems that humanity itself, and this is kind of going back to the very beginning of what we like, that now and not yet that we mentioned at the very beginning of the show, which is like Jesus has broken the bonds of Satan, sin, and death, right? Like the judgment Jesus says of his own crucifixion that in John 12 he says, now is the judgment of this world, and now is the ruler of this world, which would be the Hasatan, whatever that is. Um, now is the ruler of this world cast out. And I, when I'm lifted up from the earth, I will draw all people to myself. And so, like, he's saying that, like, whenever he goes to the cross, that is the judgment of the world. And that is, in when that happens, the ruler of this world will be cast out. But yet, that doesn't seem to be our experience. So, there's that now and not yetness, but like so what we do experience to some extent that bondage, and all the language in scripture about being in bondage to sin, like sin being like chains that bind you, and like Paul says that the thing that I want to do I don't do, and the thing I don't want to do, that's what I find myself doing. Oh, wretched man that I am, who can deliver me from this body of death? And the fact that he can say this post cross, I think, means that, like, yeah, there's always that, we're, at least for now, there's this continuation of this struggle within us. And the fact that there is a struggle within us implies to me that we're not free, not yet, not entirely. I don't know.
Maybe,
Like we are and aren't fully.
maybe.
And maybe, I don't know, maybe that's a process. Maybe there's a process to being freed, just like there's a process to being saved. I think, like, I don't think salvation is like a one-time thing. I think salvation, sanctification, being made whole, uh, being created. Doesn't Paul also talks about being transformed more and more into the image of Christ? Like, um, that's a process, more and more. You know,
Yeah, I mean, I think it seems to me pretty clear, which I don't even like using that language, but anyway, seems to me to be pretty clear that Paul at least seems to believe that it is a process until we see him face to face.
right?
In the way that, if I remember correctly, the way that's written, it seems to indicate that means when we die. So,
Yeah. I mean, until we see him face to face, and until we're known, until we know as we have been known,
right.
which all that's very interesting.
Right.
But
So to me, that seems to indicate that at the very least, Paul felt that it was a process.
yeah, yeah,
But I also don't know that it's a one size fits all kind of thing. You know what I'm trying
right,
to say? Like, I think it has a lot to do. Like the path has been laid out. The narrow road is available, but we're all traveling it at different speeds in different directions. I mean,
yeah. Well, and Jesus says, "Whom the Son sets free is free indeed."
exactly.
Um, and Paul also says where the Spirit of the Lord is, there's freedom. So I don't know what you do with. I don't know how you hold all those things together.
Well, I kind of think about it. Maybe this is just popped into my mind, but maybe it's something like this. Like, let's say I'm terrified to leave my house because I'm afraid of the boogeyman. Well, like, I'm free to leave my house anytime I want, and there is no boogeyman. But my own fear of it keeps me trapped in. So, like,
Right.
I am free, but my own unwillingness to accept that freedom keeps me in bondage.
Hmm.
And then let's say if I finally admit that there's no boogeyman and I leave my house, but then I'm afraid if I leave my yard, something bad's going to happen to me. So that, and I've gained a little more freedom, but I'm still confined to my own property here. I'm confined to my own yard,
Right.
even though technically I'm free as can be. I can go anywhere in the world I want to go, but my own delusions and my own fear keep me in bondage. My own refusal to accept the freedom. So maybe that has something to do with it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I haven't thought through it because it just popped into my head. But
Yeah. Well, I think there's something to that. Paul also says that he's the chief of sinners. So anyway, yeah,
seems to me like maybe he's a bit dramatic.
possibly. I do wonder. I didn't used to think this, but then like more and more, there's been some things that's kind of stuck out to me when I read the scriptures. That like, I wonder if Paul's an interesting character because like he wrote a good portion of the New Testament, but he also, well, according to him, he had this Damascus Road experience. He wasn't one of the original 12, is what I'm saying.
Right.
He wasn't with part of Jesus's like disciples whenever Jesus was around. I mean, I can only assume that Paul was around and knew of Jesus and had maybe even seen him or heard him teach before, but like wasn't one of his followers. I can only assume that he probably had some sort of knowledge of him. But Paul also, um, it seems like, but like Paul says that he doesn't just say that Jesus appeared to him on this Damascus road. He also says that the things that he learned, he didn't learn from the apostles. I think that's what he says in Galatians, that
Yeah, he learned from no man.
he learned from no man, that he was. It makes it seem like he sat and talked with Jesus, like Jesus taught him all these things, which is very interesting. But then there are times whenever it seems like what Paul is saying is contradicting the gospel of Jesus. At times, certain times,
Yeah, I mean,
in certain ways.
depending on how critically, where you're at on your faith journey, how critically you want to look at some of the scriptures and put the pieces together. I mean, there seems to be a pretty clear indication. I mean, I think it's in the scriptures themselves that there seemed to be some disagreement between Paul and for sure Peter and also James, which I don't believe James was one of the 12, but it's traditionally held that it was the brother of Jesus.
Right.
So people that were closer to Jesus when he was alive than Paul was, obviously.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it seems to be that there was some sort of contention there. I mean, I don't know how much there is, depending on who you're reading and listening to. There's some people make a bigger deal out of it. Some people kind of gloss over it. Some people want to pretend like it doesn't even exist, but I don't think that's honest either.
Right. Yeah, it's just an interesting thing because then you can't necessarily then say that like Paul's just making stuff up either because Jesus, and this is something else I was thinking about today, which is like Jesus says outright to his disciples, I got a lot of stuff to tell you guys, but y'all can't handle it right now.
Right.
So like in like a good teacher, Jesus is having to teach his audience and his disciples and those that are in the crowd and listening to him, like he has to teach people where they're at their level. So it may not necessarily even be contradictions in one sense, if it is true that Paul is taught from Jesus himself. It
Right.
may be that Paul was ready. I mean, Paul even talks about this in it with his own um, students and disciples or whatever. That when he in his letters to the churches, to the Corinthians, he says, that they're not ready for the meat, or
Right.
he had to speak to them like as children or whatever. And like and it may be that Paul was able to that he was ready for certain things and then was able to pass those things on to us, even though maybe, and in some ways, maybe it sounds contradictory to certain things that are in the Gospels, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's just part of the progression. In in John's Gospel, the way he ends it, he says that, and this is crazy if you actually think about it. If you think about the words he actually says, 'cause I'm pretty sure the way it's worded is that he says if you were to write down everything, that there was essentially like there's not enough ink, there's not enough paper, there's not enough, or papyrus, whatever, there's not enough, like there, you would just have someone documenting for all of eternity and never fill it and never come to the end of it.
Right.
It's some I don't remember exactly the wording of it, but that's essentially what he's trying to say.
Yeah, that's the gist of it.
And so, like, if you just think about that, you know what? Now it's bothering me. I need to read it. I need to just read it and see exactly how it's worded. But like, I mean, if you just think about the implications of that, because that's something I was thinking about today. Is like,
I think it's a really great example of how you can so many things can just be because when I read that, like the implications that I get from that is he's just trying to say that yeah, there's a lot of stuff still to be written, a lot of stuff left to be learned. Like you know what I mean? I don't take it too hyper literally. I don't read too much into it, but I mean, yeah, I think it's sort of just a literary tool that he's saying.
yeah. Well, and I mean, and I've true. Yeah, I'm not saying that it's not that also,
Right.
but he says in verse 20, this is John 21 verses 24 and 25. This is the disciple who is testifying to these things and has written them, and we know that his testimony is true. But there are also so many other things that Jesus did. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written if everything had been written down. And so, like, I mean, if you just think about that, yeah, to your point, maybe he's just being like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff. But I mean, if you think about, he was only 33, right, ish, when he died. Like, if you if you wrote down every single detail of his life, you'd have 33 years worth of stuff. But would that fill up the entire world? I don't think so.
I mean,
But again, I know that like I'm thinking of it too literally, but where my mind was going with that is to like Jesus also, because I mean, and this is something that we've kind of disagreed on, I think, in the past, but like I think that Jesus's life is not just, he is taking on human being itself. No, he's not just a human, another human, one among many, but he is taking on human being itself and living the life that we are called to live as us and for us and with us and all the things. And so if that's the case, then you're talking about every human being that's ever lived. And if you're talking about that, yeah, you wouldn't be able to contain that
right.
if you wrote all of that down. Like every,
It sounds awfully non-dualistic of you.
well, I mean, I think that I think that I kind of am. I just frame it differently than you, but I don't know why I don't know why I initially brought that up.
I don't remember now either.
We were talking about Paul, how it seems like Paul was disagreeing.
Well, yeah, it was because you were saying that there perhaps in the situations where it seems like Paul's had a disagreement with Peter, or even some of the things that are contained within the Gospels, that it's not necessarily a contradiction. It could just be the progression.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, if we're gonna say that, like if there is a progression in that way, then like I mean maybe it could be that like there's so many things that Christ is saying and has said, and well, all the things that were said to Paul, and all the things that were said through the Spirit to uh, whoever, throughout all of history. If it's Christ and Christ is the one speaking, then yeah, the thing and Christ is the one doing the things, then yeah, I mean, maybe past, present, and future, everything that's ever been done and said through Christ is. I mean, if you had documented all of that, then yeah, they probably wouldn't. The world probably couldn't contain it. You know. So that's why I like.
Who's got time to read all those books anyway?
But you know what I mean? Like I know that like in one sense, yeah, you're 100% correct. Like there were not. I don't know that John even intended it to be. Although I don't know, John's pretty mystical. It's definitely the most mystical gospel
Right.
of the gospels.
Undisputedly, really, in my opinion.
So
I guess somebody could want to argue with me, but I will fight them.
physically, I'll put all this Jesus stuff out the window for a second, pal. Punch you in the nose.
We've tried turning the other cheek.
Oh, DJ,
Nobody ever thought they would hear me quote.
Donald Jr. How absurd is it that he actually said that, though?
You
At
know,
a Christian event, no
it's
less.
less absurd to me that was said than that there was no condemnation for it or no
Yeah,
pushback. Nobody
right.
gives a crap.
Yeah,
To me,
it's
that's the
insane.
absurd part.
Yeah, yeah. True. The fact that he wasn't booed off the stage after he said it.
Right.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah,
It's craziness.
I would agree.
I don't know if we want to go the political route. I
I
don't know.
I actually haven't been thinking at all about politics, so
Yeah.
I I've had it's been a weird time for me. You know, we lost CoCo
Oh, yeah.
on Sunday, our dog, which was so unexpected
Yeah.
and so. I mean, I don't know. I think people that have had a close pet know what it's like. But if you haven't ever been through that, you don't know. You don't understand that it really does. I mean, we had that dog for 10 years, and through some of our when me and Kelly were going through our infertility struggles, like that was sort of what the impetus to getting CoCo was like. We weren't able to have a child, but we had these paternal instincts, that we want that we and so we got a dog. I don't know that that's really a healthy way to cope with that, but that's what we did. So I
Yeah.
mean, she was that for us, and went through those highs and lows with us, along the way, and she was growing up with Finn, I mean,
Yeah.
and I don't, he knows CoCo, and I don't know how much he'll remember though, because he's only 3. He won't even be. He's almost 4.
Right.
So that's kind of a. But yeah, it was just so unexpected that it's just a real. It's been a real hard time.
Yeah.
I've been struggling with that a lot,
Yeah.
and Kelly and everybody has really, even Finn, and
Right.
so that's where I've been in a weird space
Yeah.
because of that.
Right.
So, but yeah,
Yeah.
which doesn't really lend much to theology other than just the whole that some things don't understand and make sense, and some things suck.
Yeah. Do all dogs go to heaven?
If they don't, I don't want to go.
Yeah.
If Coco's not there, I don't want to go.
Right. I mean, yeah, that's a legit question,
Yeah.
Like,
Well, the funny thing is I actually didn't know where we were going to go in this episode. I was talking to Kelly earlier today because about it, because we were
yeah.
both. I mean, I was sitting at work at my desk crying like a dummy. It's like if somebody walks by and sees me right now, they're going to freak out. There's this big, 270-pound guy with a big beard sitting at his desk, just bawling his eyes out at work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I told Kelly that, like, I definitely believe in hell because I'm in it. Like, I feel it right now. I feel it.
Right.
You know what I mean? Which I know that we had talked about potentially bringing up hell. And so that was like, I don't know if I could even talk about it. And then here I am talking about it. But just because, like, yeah, I feel that. I know hell's real because I feel it. I'm sitting here right now in this chair. I'm in hell.
Yeah.
The pain that has caused me, and not even just the pain, but really for that particular situation, I feel like this is individual for everybody, you know, but because it was so unexpected, and I just keep thinking back to like how like that day was her last day and we didn't pay her hardly no attention. I mean, it was Sunday. We were gone all day and we even left earlier than we normally do because, you know, there was that meeting before church that Kelly went to. And so she just took me and Finn and dropped us off at her mom and dad. So we even left earlier than we normally do. So we weren't home at all. We paid her no attention at all that day. You know what I mean? And so
Right.
those are the things that like I think, you know, when I took Wallace outside, I was thinking back to all the times because CoCo had this thing about her where she would, it doesn't matter how cold it was or if it was raining or she was nosy, always smelling the ground. And like I would be out there freezing cold, just like, will you please just use the bathroom and get back in? And I would get frustrated with her.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
Right.
now, like when I go out with just Wally and I'm like, I would give anything to stand out in the cold one more time. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Or like the today, my Tupperware that I took my fruit in had been chewed on because she had a habit of getting dirty dishes out of the sink if you just set them in the sink before you loaded them and you left the house. Even if you just ran down to the store real quick, like, oh, I'm not going to load the dishwasher. I'll be back in 10 minutes. She was big enough that she could reach up there and grab the dishes out of the sink, and she would get my Tupperwares and chew them up. And I would get so frustrated with that because then I had to buy new Tupperwares, and sometimes I had all these Tupperwares and I didn't have a top to go with them because she would just chew up the top, or the vice versa, and I would get so frustrated about that. Now I'm like, it's so silly, and
Yeah.
it's like remembering those things is where the hell comes in. You know, it's like
Right.
the things that I wish were different that I can never get back, like that. In that sense, hell is eternal for me because I'll never forget that. Like I will live that forever for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
I mean, I don't know, like it's not eternal as far as like the way that we generally conceptualize eternal, but for my lived experience here, that's eternal.
Yeah.
Those regrets, they don't ever die until I do, you know,
Right.
or until I can work it out. Maybe they die, I don't know, but they don't feel like they do today. Let me tell you that, which this has only
Yeah.
been 2 days, but
Yeah. Well, and like that's like, I mean, to use the biblical language of like the word ionios, like it doesn't necessarily mean forever.
right.
Like it definitely means a long period of time. Like it literally means an eon or
An
an
age.
age,
Yeah.
like a long span of time that you can't see the end of. So like in that sense, like yeah, it's you could say that it's eternal
Yeah.
in that sense because you can't see the end of it yet.
Mm-mm.
Now there may be some space in some alternate dimension, some sort of something that we might call heaven, in which maybe you get to apologize to her for you being frustrated and those things that are haunting you now. Maybe you will have an opportunity to make those things right somehow. You know,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Or if there's some way to work through that even now, who knows?
Right?
You
Yeah.
know, where there's some sort of solace in it, or that could be sort of a healing. You know,
Right.
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, but it's just another element of that because, like, we always talk whenever we talk about universal salvation, we talk about like everything being made right and reconciliation and healing and wholeness and completeness and shalom, peace. Like um, we always we tend to think of it in terms of like people. I think a lot of us do, but I mean it includes all of creation, including you know CoCo.
Well, I mean, it's my lived experience, you know, and I'm a human. I mean,
Yeah,
regardless, it's my. I mean, obviously, it was her lived experience too, but I mean, that's. I mean, it really is a perfect example of how much that stuff reverberates because in one hand, you know, I've got that stuff that I've already described, but also like the life that we lived like together. I mean, she's imprinted on me forever. You know, I will never forget her.
yeah,
And so, I don't know. It's just we do tend to think about those things that kind of eternal life and eternal damnation, I guess you want to say, eternal punishment being just for humans for some reason. That's why we tend to think about that. But it's funny how that this experience for me, at least for my lived experience at the moment, seems to be that it's bigger than that.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that's where my mind's been. It's been it's been heavy
Yeah,
for
man.
me, you know.
Yeah.
So, not like I said, I haven't been thinking much about it in terms of theology, really, other than that hell thing struck me today, which that
Yeah.
struck me out of the blue. Um, which maybe it just kind of, I mean, some people might watch this and think it's silly just because it is just a dog or whatever, but and they've been through way worse heartaches than that, and maybe you have. That's just my lived experience. I'm sure I've got a lot worse things ahead of me too. Unfortunately, I've
Yeah.
got a lot better things ahead, but there's also a lot more heartache to come my way depending on how long I live. So,
Right. I mean, yeah. Unfortunately, that's part of life. You know, as you get older, the older you get, the more you begin to lose
right.
things just in general. Not you lose people, you lose, your body starts to deteriorate, your mind starts to deteriorate. We're making this a real bummer of a show,
Well,
but
I was already in kind of a bummer of a mood, so.
well, yeah,
But the weird thing about that is, and what you're saying is like that's literally the whole basis, or at least from a Christian non-Buddhist perspective, but somebody who has spent a little bit of time reading the literature, that's essentially the basis of Buddhism is impermanence. Everything's changing. Every moment changes.
yeah,
Nothing is the same from moment to moment. And our clinging to those things causes suffering. Our attachment to things causes suffering
yeah,
because things change, because impermanence is the reality of things. So anything that you desire, anything that you cling to, anything that you are attached to, including your own life or the lives of others, is impermanent. So any sort of attachment that you have to those things is going to cause pain. That's sort of the basis of it, which I actually see that's part of why I see that a lot in the teachings of Jesus as well. The idea of setting your sights on things above, not of things of the world. The
right,
emphasis on not being attached to things where I'm uneducated enough to know, and where my ignorance lies, is how you embody that in a loving way without just becoming detached to everything.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Because, like, using the example of CoCo, like, the only way, that I wouldn't be experiencing this pain is if I wasn't attached.
right,
But then what does that look like?
yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah. So I mean, there's certain elements of that impermanence that I think make sense to me, and certain things that don't. Like the fact that each moment is fleeting and changing, like you're not going to be the same person, like you are in transition, like that everyone and everything is in a process of change all the time. Like that makes sense to me. But I don't know that that means that we should not. I think that not all attachments are wrong.
Right. Well, and that's what I mean is that I'm not educated enough to know that yet. Like that's where I understand my ignorance is that I think that the point isn't to become completely detached to everything. I don't know, maybe that is the point, but that doesn't seem right to me yet. I mean, but at the same time, I think it is a good lesson in not becoming attached to things that aren't worth suffering for. But some things are worth suffering for.
Yeah,
Like the deep love that you feel for your spouse only comes through an attachment of sorts, and that means it's going to hurt like hell
yeah,
if something were to happen to them.
right,
But some things are, that love and that life that you've lived together, some things are worth suffering for.
right, yeah,
So And I'm sure that that's because I know that there's been way smarter people than me who think through this stuff. So I'm sure there's answers out there. Like I said, I'm just ignorant. I'm not studied enough to know yet.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that that's right though. I think that that there are things that are worth suffering for. I mean, if I didn't think that, then I don't know that I would. Mm, trying to think through that before I say it, because like what that reminded me of is the whole kind of getting back into the health stuff. Like a lot of things that you'll hear is people saying like, well, if there's if you're right about everyone being saved, then what's the point in
Right.
being a Christian? What's the point in living this life? And it's like, yeah, well, you could say the same thing about a marriage or any other thing that requires you to set aside your own selfishness
Right.
to put someone else's needs above your own, to suffer. Like relationships involve some level of suffering at one to one extent or another,
Right.
you know? And like, does that mean that they aren't worth it? No, it
Right.
doesn't mean that. So like,
Which, to be fair, I mean, going back to the example with Coco, I mean, it's not that it wouldn't have hurt just losing her period. That obviously hurts. But that's not
right.
what's causing my suffering. And you know what I mean? Like it's the fact that it happened within the regrets that I have looking back.
Yeah.
So, which I still think is an important lesson to learn. Like your actions do matter.
Yeah.
In a way, if we wanted to try to biblicize some of that language, I guess you could say your works do matter in that regard.
Yeah. Well, I think that that's what the majority, I don't know. What I was going to say is like, I think that hell, to some extent, the experience of it, I think it is regret,
Yeah.
you know? I think that's a big part of it.
Which and the part of this is too just being hard on yourself, right? Because I mean, we gave Coco a good life. She was a shelter dog. We saved her from the shelter. She got to live with us for 10 years. We showed her love. And like, when I say that I would get frustrated at her for chewing up my Tupperware occasionally, or like, it's not like I beat her or anything. You know what
Right.
I
Yeah.
mean? Like I would get frustrated, or like when she was outside, it wasn't even like I would yell at her or anything, but just an internal sort of frustration that I would feel. So it's not like I wasn't good to her and gave her a good life, but still, there's
Right.
still regrets,
Yeah.
you know. I'm sure everybody has them. That's life. But
Right. But I do think that some of the things that, like to your point, I think some of the things that hurt the most in our lives are those moments we regret,
right.
you know, things that haunt us, things we've done or left undone or said or didn't say. And, those things can haunt you.
Yeah, and I don't know that we ever, I mean, unless you've lived a perfect life, I don't know that we ever don't experience that.
Yeah.
Unless you lived a perfect life or you never experienced loss somehow, then I don't know, because I'm sure that everybody's had some extent of regrets,
Yeah.
Everybody that's lost somebody wishes they would have spent a little more time with them, or when they were with them, they would have been more present and mindful in the moment.
Yeah.
But it's an opportunity when you do experience that. It's an opportunity to be more mindful of that. Like with dogs, we've got another dog, Wally, and that's our chance to take those regrets that I have with Coco and make them right.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
so well, also he's not tall enough to get my Tupperware. He's a little dog,
Yeah.
but yeah. So that doesn't help us theologically, I guess, but maybe we kind of made it a little bit theology.
Yeah. I mean, some of it is definitely applicable. Yeah.
But it's been hard for me to kind of get in a headspace for it, because if I have too long to just start thinking about stuff, that's what I start to think about. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So rather than doing any sort of deep thinking, I've tried to distract myself,
Right.
you know?
Yeah. Makes sense.
So
Yeah.
I have tried to keep up on my reading because I set the goal to read at least 10 pages of my Torrance book a day till I finish it because it's 400 pages, 450. So that'd be 45 days. So I'm trying to read at least 10 pages. So I did that on my lunch break. But
How far into it are you?
165, I think, or so. I'm averaging more than 10 because I wanted to read at least 10 a day, but when I have extra time, I've been trying to get a couple pages extra in here and there so I can get it finished.
Got any good stuff out of it?
Of course, there is good stuff. I don't think that I've liked it as much as I liked Incarnation. He's used some of the language in this Atonement book, which I'm trying to be open minded to, but some of the language that he uses, I don't really care for. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Which, I mean, again, I say that humbly, knowing that he's a lot smarter than me, and if it doesn't make sense to me, the failure's probably on my part. But
Right.
I mean, he does seem to take the whole. It's really hard to tell because he does emphasize the righteousness of God and how God is he can't just put up with sin, and so there is real judgment and punishment that has to be mete out. You know what I mean? And but he frames it in a way of love. I mean, he emphasizes the love, but some of that language that he uses in the justice and the I mean, it almost seems like he does take more of a penal substitution approach, and I don't, obviously. So there's a little bit of differences there, but
Yeah.
which is probably why I haven't liked it as much as I liked Incarnation. But also, again, that doesn't mean that it's not true either. Just because I'm uncomfortable or don't understand or don't like something doesn't make it true.
Right. Yeah, that's something I had thought about a little bit since I finished that book, The Wood Between the Worlds from Brian Zahn, because he goes through several different atonement theories, and the whole thing's about the cross. So, you know, I don't know. There, I do think that there's some sort of substitutionary element present in the cross. I don't think that it's anything that creates a division between the Trinity, where like the Father is pouring out his wrath on the
Right.
Son. But there's definitely some sort of substitutionary element going on there, I think, and um, I don't know how it all works, but I do think that that is an element of what's going on at the cross.
Which Torrance is deeply Trinitarian, so he does definitely doesn't espouse any sort of separation in
Right.
this. I mean, he does frame it more from the perspective of like just like the covenant thing, right? Like in Jesus, God is fulfilling the covenant from man's side and from God's side. Like he kind of frames the cross from that perspective too, as like God giving himself to man, but also humanity in Christ giving themselves to God. So, like it's not
Yeah.
so much a division between the Father and Son, so much as he's in the person of Christ fulfilling both sides,
Right.
you know.
And I mean, it depends on what we mean by punishment or judgment, right? Because like going back to what I quoted earlier from John 12, like now is the judgment of this world. Well, if the judgment of this world is that the world is to be, I mean, if the wages of sin is death, well then Jesus literally pays that price, you know. Um and even using that language is something to try to wrap your head around. It's not that he's paying, like literally paying off God. I think if there's anyone being paid off, it's the devil, whatever that even
The
means.
devil.
But yeah, but I mean, I mean, I do think that because so like what's coming to mind is that passage from Zephaniah 3:8, and you know what? Let me just read it.
Zeffy.
Zephay,
Who's going to read some Zeffy on their podcast?
me.
Most people don't even know that book exists.
Well, I don't. To be honest, it's a really short one. It's only 3 chapters. I don't remember a whole lot of the rest of it, but I know. So this says the punishment and conversion of the nations, which even that, like the heading in here, punishment and conversion of the nations, it sounds pretty universalist. Anyway, but this is the NRSV, and they're liberals. Boo! Boo! Anyway, this is Zephaniah 3, starting in verse 8. Therefore, wait for me, says the Lord, for the day when I arise as a witness. For my decision is to gather nations, to assemble kingdoms, to pour out upon them my indignation, all the heat of my anger. For in the fire of my passion, in the fire of my passion, all the earth shall be consumed. At that time I will change the speech of the peoples to a pure speech, that all of them may call on the name of the Lord and serve him with one accord. So, if we're thinking about this, and if we're reading, like, I mean, I think that this is how the early Christians read the scriptures. I think that they were reading, because whenever they're preaching and teaching the gospel, they're not doing it from the New Testament. It's not written yet.
Right.
They're they're doing it from the Old Testament. So I think that when they're reading something like this, like when I think that maybe what John had in mind whenever he talks about whenever he's writing this story where Jesus is saying, now is the judgment of this world, and um, now is the ruler of this world cast out, and when I'm lifted up, I will draw all people to myself. I think that the judgment of the world, maybe he's talking about this very thing. He's talking about the decision of the Lord to gather the nations, to assemble the kingdoms, to pour out on them his indignation, all the heat of his anger. For in the fire of his passion, in his passion, well, what do we refer to the cross as his passion?
Right.
His suffering. Um, in the fire of my passion, all the earth shall be consumed. At that time I will change the speech of the people to a pure speech, that all of them may call on the name of the Lord and serve him with one accord. Some translations say serve him shoulder to shoulder. I like that better. But
I'm too claustrophobic for that.
it is more relational,
Right.
you know. But but yeah, man, I mean, I think that if that's the judgment of the world, and because Jesus also, I think it's in Luke's gospel where Jesus talks about he come to bring a fire to the earth, and he wishes it was already kindled. Do you remember that?
Yes,
I
somewhat.
think it's in Luke's gospel. And then, Malachi prophesies that when he comes, he would be like a refiner's fire and a launderer's soap, you know. Um, I'm trying to figure out where that's at. It's Luke 12:49. Let me read that one real quick. Why not? You know,
Why not?
I already got
You're the boss here. This is your show.
I already got the Bible out here. Why not?
I'm just here to provide the good looks.
So this is Luke 12:49. He says, I came to bring fire to the earth, and how I wish it were already kindled. I have a baptism with which to be baptized, and what stress I am under until it is completed. So he's saying that he's this fire that he intends to bring to the earth that he wished was already kindled is this baptism in which he's supposed to undergo, and he's under stress until it is completed, until it is finished. He's referring to the cross here
Right.
pretty plainly. It seems like he's referring to the cross, and he describes him going to the cross as bringing fire to the earth. Again, I think that the early Christians would have read that passage that we just read from Zephaniah 3:8 and think that the judgment of this world is him bringing fire on the earth.
Right.
But that fire, in Zephaniah's um in Zephaniah there he talks it is his anger. It is his wrath, but it's also his passion. It's his suffering. He's the one to you and to Torrance's point, TF Torrance's point, oh Tommy Torrance. He's holding up both ends. He is the one suffering. He is the one that is suffering, and it is his judgment on the world that he's undergoing. But this judgment is meant to bring about conversion. It's meant to bring about
Right.
purification.
Well, I think that that's where the language gets a little weird for me, and why it's
Yeah,
probably got to be a little, I don't know, maybe it's touchy for me, and maybe it's not for other people, just because like
it's a little touchy for me too.
it's a little bit like what we talked about in our wrath episode, a
Yeah,
few weeks ago. It was like I don't believe that there was any wrath poured out on us. It's on the sin,
right.
right? Like it has to be,
Yeah,
that has to be dealt with. It's not that it's not that God could just turn a blind eye to it, because that would be like leaving a sick person sick,
right.
right?
Yeah,
Like the cancer has to be cut out. The
right.
disease has to be dealt with.
Yeah,
So it has to be destroyed,
yeah,
you know? So that would be the wrath
right,
is poured out not upon us as individual beings, not as like punishing his children, but actually freeing his children to be his children.
right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean,
Which I think that's probably what he would say too. It's just
yeah,
the language thing.
yeah. I mean, and that's a perfectly fine way to understand all the things that I just said too.
Right.
You know,
Yeah, absolutely.
so I mean, but it's not. It doesn't have to just. So like, I think that anyone who is just a standard PSA, like
Right.
penal substitution, like they could affirm what I said too.
Right.
But you don't have to think about it in those terms. You
Right.
can think about it as exactly what you said: the wrath, the anger, the is the thing in which the fire is consuming is the sin. You know,
Right.
but because in one sense, all of creation, I think, is has a fallenness to it, and even fallenness. I don't even know if I like using that language anymore because I don't know
Right.
if there was a fall or if we're just haven't been created yet. But all that gets a little weird for me. But it's either way. I mean, I think that there's you know, it's not necessarily even just about our human being sin, but like there is anything that's wrong. The reason that the fire is for the whole earth is because there's so much that's needs purification that needs to be set right in the world itself, not just within us.
Right. Well, I just think it's again, it comes back to the language thing, because it's the way it was presented to me, but in the way I learned it is as if it was transactional, right? It's like, well, the rules say that God has to punish sin, and so you're a sinner, you're going to get punished, right? Like but it's so like that is so straightforward, it's almost nonsensical, because it's like, well, then who made the rule? Right? Like if you
Right.
if you frame it from that way, like it's some sort of divine law that God has to uphold, well, like he created it that way.
Yeah.
That makes him, from my perspective, it makes him a monster. Like, because he didn't have to create it that way, but he did. But like when you view it from the perspective of like, it's not like he's upholding some law that he's just, well, the punishment for the payment is the fine that you must pay according to the court of law is this, and so it's got to happen. Rather than it being like that, he's like a good father destroying the things that are keeping his children in bondage. Well, that's a completely different framing of it.
Yeah.
Like, to me, that's a lot better. That's a lot better story.
Right. It's different than so like I mean and actually the story the story of the quote unquote fall says that outright. Like, if you pay attention to what Jesus says, or not Jesus, but well, I mean, I guess Jesus, God, says in the story there, he doesn't say, "In the day you eat of it, I'm gonna kill you." He says, "In the day you eat of it, you will die."
Right.
And in other words, there's consequences to the things that you do. Uh, this thing is going to bring death upon you, but that doesn't mean that he made it. Like that doesn't mean that this is the law that he set forth. It's just this is the natural consequences of living your life this way. It it's better for you to listen to me, you know,
Right.
because things go bad when you don't.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that necessarily means that he
Yeah.
is responsible for it.
It gets real tricky because it goes back to some of the stuff we were talking about earlier about like, well, did he know beforehand or not? Like,
Right.
you know what I mean? Like, what's his relationship to outside of time and simultaneously inside of time and all that? You know, because again, from the perspective of Jesus never being Plan B, I mean, there is a way to view that to where like, well, yeah, it is his fault, but because that's the way he wanted it to be. You know what I mean? But again, it's not from a perspective of that's why I think that language of like it's a law that has to be like just paid in full for no other reason than that's I just God created this law. Like to me that's ridiculous.
So I mean, it all of this stuff is kind of tying in together because again, with the whole freedom thing and free will thing, like if God wanted us to be free, then in one sense, there's no way for us to be free without us having the ability to make choices, and there's no way for us to make choices without there being consequences, and there's no way for us to experience consequences without there being the possibility of negative consequences, I think. You know what I mean? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know that if God was going to give us freedom, I don't know that that the consequences necessarily are on him. I mean, to some extent, I guess they are, but only insofar as it's better for us to be free than to be like some sort of like programmed like robots that just do his bidding, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
All
there's no relationship there.
there's so many deep ends that you can go off of because then immediately my first thing that I'm thinking about I always come back to is like omnipotence, right? Like if God can do anything, then could we not be free and him be in control of the consequences? Like, is that not what omnipotence really means? Like, anything can be done. So, like, no matter what choice is made. See, I don't know. It's too deep. You can go way off a deep end on some of that stuff.
Maybe. Yeah, I don't know.
I don't either. I'm asking questions, not giving answers.
Yeah, I mean, I suspect that there's way better ways to talk about all that, but this is, I don't know where I'm at right now. I don't know. I mean, because what it makes me think of is the whole can God create a rock so big that he can't lift it? That whole thing.
Right.
Like, I mean, I think that that's maybe the wrong question. Depends on what we mean by omnipotent. I mean, it depends on what we mean by power, right? Because I think that question in particular about like a rock so big he can't lift it. Well, that's not. You're assuming that power is displayed in that way. That like true power is in raw strength or might, and like I don't know that that's what true power is.
Right. But I think that we have to be mindful of that when we just say things, right? Like when we say that God can do anything, like those are the kind of questions that come up, right?
Right. Well, so like but I guess to finish the thought there, like if power looks like a slaughtered lamb and not a ravenous lion, right? A lion seeking whom he may devour, but it looks like a slaughtered lamb, then I think that God can do anything, but the way that he accomplishes everything is through self-sacrifice, through self-sacrificial love, through uh, that kenosis, that pouring out, that somehow what looks like a weakness to us is the greatest strength that there is, and it's in that strength is how he saves the world. So it may be that those things that seem like they could have been avoided to us, hmm, maybe we're just asking the wrong questions about, or maybe we're just not thinking about power and God's intervening and God's knowing, and it may just be that we're just thinking about all of that wrong, you know? Because if God is always submitting, always in submission, well then he doesn't, maybe he doesn't intervene in that way. Maybe he doesn't prevent consequences because he does submit. And maybe he does that for the sole purpose of participation. Like he wants us to participate with him in this. And so he doesn't want to force anyone or anything.
Maybe.
Maybe. I don't know. I just keep talking as thoughts come to my head, and I don't know.
Yeah,
They may be nonsense.
I don't know really where I'm not responding really because I don't know where I want to take it because I do have a lot of thoughts, but I don't know, like they're just fresh thoughts that I haven't thought out yet. So,
Yeah. Well, that's fine. Whatever you want to do.
so
I mean, all of that was really kind of fresh thoughts to me, too.
right.
It's stuff that I've been thinking about. I thought about that a little bit today because I was listening to Brad Jerzik, and he was kind of talking about this topic a little bit. And I think I may have framed it a little bit differently than he did and what I heard today. But
Yeah. Well, I mean, where my mind went initially, again, and this is just the first thing that popped into my head is like this whole idea, because you said that God chooses to participate in submission or whatever, right? Which then therefore allows consequences. And like my mind went to initially like, well, like if you've seen someone drowning, but you refused to lift them up because you're submitted to whatever, that's the consequences of what you chose. Like, don't you think you would be a little bit responsible for that?
yes, maybe. But that's not a sin, which is what we were talking about before, I guess.
No, but I mean, it's obviously not a one for one analogy, but the point being, like, if all of these bad things happen because God has chosen not to participate in that way because He submits to allowing you to do whatever you want to do, even though it causes death and destruction and pain and heartache. Well, is that not similar to just being to not reaching out His hand and pulling us out of death?
In some ways, yeah. So like but I guess it really does depend on how you frame it because like it's because what I'm not saying that God is like there's a certain sort of like deism that's basically like which I think this is kind of like where Einstein landed, which is that like he believed in God, but he believed God gets just kind of like set everything up and like took his hands off and was like, all right, whatever.
Right.
You get whatever, all the laws are in, all the like natural laws are in place, and you guys are created, do your thing, and I'm gonna just sit back and watch it burn or whatever. Like, I'm not saying that necessarily, but I am saying that I think that if God is love, and if love means, and it doesn't mean force and coercion, if it doesn't mean, mm, I don't know, it's just one of those things where like, because love isn't just that, love is protection also. So, but then you have to answer the question, why doesn't he do that? Why doesn't he stop the person from drowning? The only way I can make sense of that is to say that like it's because he requires our participation, because that's what love requires, our cooperation, or yes, it's not forceful in that way. But anyway, sorry, you were going to say something.
I don't know what I was going to say.
I know that that's not satisfactory to anyone, and I don't even know.
To me, it really just depends on, because initially my thought with that was, because the way I framed the question, I thought this was what you were going to say, actually. I thought I lofted you a softball here and you were going to knock it out of the park. But
Oh,
no, the way that I framed the question, I thought that you were going to say that but he did intervene. Like
oh
he
well,
did
yeah,
reach
yeah,
down the hand and pull. It didn't look like what we thought it would because it's the upside down.
yeah,
But
yeah.
like he did intervene, right? He did
Right.
interject himself into time, and
Duh. Yeah.
but it depends on, again, on how you frame it, because we were talking about, like I think that we sort of did switch lanes a little bit, because I guess in that phrasing of it, what we were initially talking about was the cross, right? And the paying the punishment of sin or
Right.
whatever, right? Well, like in that way, it became him reaching his hand, saving the drowning. Um, but to get to that point, perhaps there had to be the choices made, and the suffering that were endured by mankind to get to that point. I don't know. Perhaps.
Yeah. Well, see, I just went a different direction with it because I did have that thought whenever you said reaching out his hand.
Yeah.
I did think that, but then I was thinking because you mentioned the drowning thing, which made me think of just like suffering and evil in general and
Right.
not sin and the cross anymore.
Well, and that's why I
So,
said that we did sort of switch lanes a little bit there, because that is sort of where my mind went to more with it. Is we were initially talking about the cross and just how the punishment of sin is death, and how Jesus suffered that, and almost from that old school perspective of like, well, it's a payment to, it's a law that God had to follow. He had to punish sin. Somebody had to die. Somebody had to suffer, you know. So, but yeah, I think it's a totally different question when we're talking about just human suffering. I don't know. I'm not qualified to ask that question. Well, I mean, anybody can ask. I'm not qualified to answer it.
evil and suffering.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, I really do. Like, I know I've said on here before, Chris Green basically said that theodicy is impossible. And I agree. I don't think that it's possible. And I think that no matter what we say, and actually, something that Brad Jerzik said today, he was talking about, I'm going to butcher this, I'm sure. I almost don't even know if I want to say it 'cause I'm probably going to get it wrong. But he was talking about Simone Weil, um, and he was talking about what she says about evil and suffering. And she basically says that like if you, the second that you try to explain that, all you're doing is just causing more suffering and pain in one sense in trying to explain it, that you cannot rationalize it. You cannot reason it. There's,
I think even if you think you have good answers for it, that's still true, because I know for me personally, like those, a lot of times those what people think are good answers actually serve opposite for me, because I
yeah,
think a lot of times if you actually just like what I was just exploring with the whole, what does it mean to be omnipotent, and when you say God can do anything, what do you mean by that? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
People say those things without actually thinking through the implications of it, but I always try to think through the implications of it, and sometimes those things lead me further away. It makes me have doubts because I'm like, oh, see, this is the best answer we can come up with, and if you actually think through it, it's nonsense.
Right.
So
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, and what makes sense to one person is going to be sound obscene to another. You know, like that. I was thinking about that recently. I'll come back to the Simone Weil thing here in a second, but the uh, Jordan Daniel Wood. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and he was talking about suffering a little bit, and he was talking about how the he's had. I guess he did a little piece on human suffering for somewhere. I don't remember where it was published, but and it essentially it's kind of the sort of things that we'd been talking about, that I'd been talking about, dealing with Maximus um and just the making right of everything, and um God being outside of time and not being bound and by space and time, that he shows up in the middle of time and somehow is able to affect all of time, that God's not done with our past any more than he's done with our present or future, and um and how that relates to suffering, and the potential implications of suffering in that way. And like, so the what he had written about was essentially that, like, the things that we suffer now will not, in the end, they will be made right. That it you may it to the extent that, like, it may not even, not that you'll have a scar that's healed, but the memory is still there, but like the thing that actually happened to you will be made into what it should have been, versus a thing that happened to you that you're now healed of. You know what I mean? So, but what he was saying is, like, he had several people that reached out to him that were like, "Oh man, that's so helpful to me. Like, with the things that I've suffered in my life, like, that brings me a lot of hope, a lot of joy." But he also had people reach out to him that was like, "I hate that.
yeah,
I want nothing to do with that." Um, and I think part of that is because people that have experienced real trauma in their life, especially if you live long enough to begin to heal from it, to do the work required, for a lot of people, depending on the trauma that you experience, it requires a lot of work to get to a place where you're okay. So I think for a lot of people that can be hard to hear, because it kind of makes it sound like all this work that they put into to trying to heal from that is for nothing, you know.
right.
So that
I actually heard one recently that was similar to that on a totally different podcast where this lady was funny enough, she was talking about her dog. But she had a dog that when she got it from the shelter, it was extremely skittish and it was
yeah,
aggressive. And she took it to the vet and it turned out that it had glaucoma and it had to have its eye removed. But then after it's had its eye removed, it, instead of being aggressive, was calm and it was became its true self, let's just say, you know what I mean?
right,
Its true personality, its healed version of itself, but it only had one eye. And it,
right.
like, even that became part of its personality. I don't remember what the dog's name was, but they called it like,
One-eyed Willie.
well, pirate something, like pirate Pete or whatever, like they, because he had the one eye,
Right.
like
Yeah.
but that was just who the dog was. And then so then they asked, like, if dogs go to heaven, is it going to have an eye or not? And she was like, absolutely not. Like, that's part of who it is. That's
Right.
like integral to the person, that it is. So
Maybe.
it's, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. All that stuff does get weird because I can see, I see arguments on both sides of it. Um, but whatever it is, I know that the things that have happened to us in this life will be made right. Whatever that looks like, I don't know exactly. But anyway, the whole point of me saying all that was just to say that, like, any one thing that you say about the problem of evil and suffering in this world, there's going to be some people that it sounds great to, and some people that will reject it and be offended by it.
Right.
And what Simone Weil was saying, as I understood Brad explaining what she said anyway, was that you cannot reason it, you cannot make sense of it. You shouldn't even attempt really to try um, to give hard answers for it. You can think about it and talk about it, but trying to say anything definitive is a mistake. Um, and so what she does say though is, and this is the only solace, the only thing that really, and this is something that came to me in that moment when I first had that experience at work. One of the things that came to mind and that I wrote down, and that it's only been confirmed for me as I've actually done the work of studying and praying and thinking through this stuff. But she she said that the best you can do, and again I'm butchering all of this, but essentially what she said was to be at the feet of Jesus and look up at him and see him suffering, like to behold him crucified and his suffering, and just know that he's suffering with you in your suffering. Like that we don't have a God who doesn't understand suffering. We serve a God who was tested and tried in every way that we are. We serve a God that knows suffering intimately, that knows suffering as we know it, and has suffered it as we have suffered it, and is present with us in our suffering. Like any time that anyone is suffering in this world, Christ is there suffering with them. And so long as there's any suffering in this world, Christ is suffering with us and as us. And he's taken it all upon himself for the purpose of healing it, healing all of it. Whatever that looks like, I don't know. Whether whether that dog will have one eye when it's all said and done or not, I don't know. But I know whatever it looks like to be healed, to be made whole, to for shalom, whatever that is, that I know that it has been accomplished and it will be accomplished. And in the meantime, all I know to do is to look at the one that I know has suffered and is suffering with me in my suffering. That's the best I can do for now. Yeah, I feel it. So, well, I gotta roll. I gotta pick up Finn. Oh, okay. Cool beans.